Well, recently I drove up from Florida, and I think in the time that I drove down to Florida and the time that I drove back, I saw more and more electric vehicles on the road. And surprisingly, it caught me a little bit off guard where the electric vehicles were. And in fact, I saw recently that there's more electric vehicles in Texas than there is in New York, which sort of surprised me as well. With us is Karl Brauer. He is the executive analyst for iSeeCars. Karl, good day and welcome to the Car Doctor program. And can you enlighten us a little bit about this? We've seen some growth of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles in rural areas these days, right?
Yeah, we really are. It's clear that we've transitioned from, a kind of compartmentalized buying behavior where it's only people in Los Angeles or maybe Seattle and San Francisco, or maybe a little bit in New York and Miami, who are buying these electrified vehicles, electrified being hybrid and electric. It has now really started to become very comprehensive and pervasive throughout the country. And when we looked at growth in market share for hybrid and electric vehicles from 2014 to 2022, the number one state with the highest growth percentage, the fastest growing market share, was Mississippi. And I don't think most people would have guessed that if you asked them where they thought electric vehicle and hybrid vehicle demand has gone up the most in the past 8 years. They probably wouldn't have said Mississippi. But that was the number one state. Then we had like Hawaii in there, Utah in the top 5. And really, when we looked at the top 15, you had some very interesting states in there: Alabama, Nebraska. So it's growing in non-traditional areas people wouldn't associate with, quote unquote, green demand or green oriented citizens.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it really has seemed like, and I guess it's not to be surprised that, early adopters, California, the West Coast, everything starts on the West Coast and moves east. And but usually it's the coast. Usually it's the West Coast and the East Coast and sort of blends to the middle. But to see this kind of growth, and you and I talked once before about electric vehicles and how they're searched for. But it seemed like electric and hybrid vehicles, people were searching for them, but they're a little bit slow to pull the trigger on buying them. But
Right.
this is really starting to show that thinking is coming around a little bit.
Precisely. Yeah, I think that's exactly right, John, is that we used to see a lot of people curious about them, but the ones that would commit to ownership was pretty limited to those early adopter states, as you said. And now we see these commitments coming from non-early adopter states. And, I think when you think about the fact that California barely made like the top 10 in terms of growth, and a city like Los Angeles didn't make the top 15 in terms of cities that were big, but Birmingham, Alabama did make the top. It was the number 7th in the city when we broke it down by city or metro area versus state. California is, Los Angeles didn't make the top 15. Birmingham, Alabama, number 7.
Do you think it has to do with saturation? I mean, California has had the highest percentage of electric vehicles, for instance, compared to the rest of the country. Is there kind of a saturation rate that maybe comes into play here where, and I'm making the number up, 10% of the new car sales in California are EVs as opposed to maybe 3% in Boston? Is that sort of the growth window when you look at that maybe there wasn't that big a number and it had that chance to pop up to 3 or 4%?
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I think obviously when you've only got a few people with electric vehicles, it's much easier to have that growth rate go up rapidly versus when you already have a lot of people with electric vehicles, relatively speaking. And I think you're right that there seems to be kind of more resistance once you're somewhere in like the 5 to 10% range of the total market in a given state, versus when you're in the 0.5% to 3 or 4%, where there seems to be much more potential for rapid growth. That's what we saw with this study. But still, when you think about the fact that the growth rate in California was right around 70%, and then the growth rate in Mississippi was 241%. Even though Mississippi started much smaller, they're growing at over 3 times the rate of California. So that's going to start to flatten that out. I think what's going to happen is you may see more resistance on the 5+% market share states, but you're going to see less resistance, and eventually we're going to have this kind of flattening out of most of the states probably being around 5% versus only a few of them.
And I think maybe it was just over the weekend, I read someone else's study that said once electric vehicles get in that 5% range, that's sort of the tipping point. That might be the point that when you see 5% of the new car sales being EVs or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, or maybe even just hybrids, that really starts to kind of turn things around a little bit, where people start to go, maybe a hybrid, maybe a plug-in hybrid, maybe a pure battery electric vehicle is something that would work for me as well. Do you see that in your studies as well?
Yeah, I definitely think that, market share begets market share, awareness begets awareness, so we're going to keep seeing these things go from kind of what are still considered by many people these exotic, weird, cars. And as they become less exotic, less weird, less strange, the idea of buying one because your neighbor's had one for 2 years, hasn't had any problems, and now they get to drive past $3, $4, $5, $6 a gallon gas signs and not care about them because they're running either a pure electric or even a plug-in hybrid, which a lot of people can use as a pure electric for most of their driving if they've got 40, 50 plus mile range out of these plug-in hybrids. And I think that particularly in the last 6 months, obviously with gas prices, is probably really starting to resonate with people. The idea of getting away from being at the mercy of those fuel prices by getting one of these vehicles.
And your studies have pointed to this in the past, that the fleet of cars in the United States has never been older than it has been, 12.4 years or whatever it is now. And so people shouldn't expect to see, every other house on the road have a hybrid or an electric car in the driveway, because it does take a while for that fleet to start to turn over, to see those new cars on the road and in people's driveways.
100%. And then you roll in the fact that new electric vehicles are getting better in every way, but they're also continuing to get more expensive. We've got a global conflict that's causing a reduction in the supply of lithium and palladium and nickel. All the things you need to make battery packs for electric cars have only getting harder to get at this particular moment, making them even more expensive. So, there is still this kind of price difference between an internal combustion vehicle and an electric car. And that can be a big stumbling block for people. Price is a huge determinant for people when they're buying a vehicle. And if there's a big jump to get an electric car, new or used, versus an internal combustion engine vehicle, that's still a big barrier. So longer term, we really need to see price parity, and hopefully not because internal combustion engine cars just keep getting more expensive, but because the price of electric vehicles starts to drop and they can start to come together. And I think if that were to happen, like if tomorrow we woke up and somehow the difference between an electric car and an internal combustion engine car was nothing price-wise, you got the same amount of car for the same money, I think you'd start to see some real rapid EV adoption, but we're not there yet. And some would say we seem further away from that now than we were 6 months ago because of what's gone on with the supply of some of these materials.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I remember hearing from, it was some executive for Toyota 15 years ago, that kind of their vision was that you were going to buy, pick the vehicle, a Camry. And it was going to be a gasoline Camry. It was going to be a hybrid Camry. It was going to be a plug-in hybrid, and maybe it'd be an electric car. And in some cases, that has almost come true with a lot of vehicle manufacturers, that the powertrain is just a box you check off when you go to order the vehicle, kind of almost making this the golden age of the automobile, the new golden age, where you do have probably more choices than you ever have when it comes to buying a car. And I think sites like iSeeCars, where you can really do the comparison and do some of that homework ahead of time, is really valuable for people trying to make that decision and do those side-by-side comparisons.
Agree 100%. And, it's not just the golden age of cars, it's the golden age of information. And so you now have the ability to sit in your house and see what the price of all these different types of vehicles are across the entire country in different markets and different states. And I keep telling people in today's world, more so than ever, flexibility is your friend. If you're looking to buy a new vehicle, or a new to you used vehicle, even if you can be more flexible in not only what you're willing to buy, but where you're willing to go to get it, with all the information available to know that you could potentially save $2, $3, $5,000 by going a couple states over. That seems like a pain to go that far to get a car, but at $5,000 savings, even if you got to go get a plane ticket and it takes you 2 days to drive back, you break down $5,000 on a per hour basis. And with the price of that airline ticket, you're still making good money. You're getting a good pay rate to save your $5,000 car purchase and go to a couple states over, 300, 400, 500 miles away. So that's the great thing about today's world, is that we have both the variety of cars, as you mentioned, and the variety of information and the ability to know where those cars are, which cars are priced how. And if you want to travel to go get something and be more flexible in your shopping, you can.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, pre-pandemic, people would say to me, when is there a good time to buy a car? And basically it was any time was a good time to buy a car. Maybe you could do a little bit better at the end of the month, or maybe the last day of the year, you might do a little bit better because there may have been some bonuses or spiffs that could be applied to you. But basically, if you went in on the 10th of the month or the 20th of the month, it really wasn't any different. Today it's a little bit tricky, and there is a little bit of sticker shock, I guess, when people are shopping a little bit and they're not seeing quite the variety. So like you pointed out, with a site like iSeeCars, all of a sudden now your showroom doesn't have any walls to it. You're looking at a lot wider view of where you can go car shopping. And as you pointed out, I live outside of Boston. Could I drive to Hartford and get a good price on a car? Would I? Absolutely. If I could save several $1,000s, sure.
Exactly. And that's really what people need to keep in mind, is just expand your horizons, literally, in terms of where you're willing to go for your car. And you might be happily surprised at the level of money you could save.
Yeah. And before we let you go, let's kind of just review what iSeeCars is, kind of where it started. I know it started with one of the CEOs was frustrated in the car buying world. He went out car shopping, couldn't find what he wanted, and that sort of turned into iSeeCars. But kind of give us the Reader's Digest version of what iSeeCars is.
Yeah, it's a information site about vehicles that help you pick the car you want and identify where and how much you should pay for it. So we've got all the vehicle listings across the country from all the dealerships and private individuals, so you can look in whatever area you want. And then we can tell you how good a deal it is based on the market in that local area, whether you're overpaying or underpaying. And so it's really very easy to find vehicles that are currently for sale locally or nationally or anywhere in between. And that's kind of our primary business model. But of course, we also have a full editorial package with all sorts of studies, like this one we just did on hybrid electric vehicle market share, but lots of advice articles on how to buy a car and how to save money, which cars are hot, what's going on with the pricing trends. So not just the vehicles, but a lot of context and data behind the vehicle sales that we've turned into hopefully very usable consumer information for shoppers.
Yeah, I know, kind of a maybe disappointing when you go to buy a new car, but some of the ones that depreciate the fastest, as an example, can be some of the best used car values.
Right. And that's what you always want to keep in mind, is that there are certain cars and certain brands that are known for kind of dropping in value, but that just means don't buy them new, but seriously consider them used, because what you can get off on that price from new 2 or 3 years later, it could be substantial. And if you really like those cars, that's a great way to get one of those vehicles and save a lot of money in the process versus buying it new and you taking the hit to your depreciation.
Yeah. And you mentioned private party used car sales. If I had a car for sale, I could post it on iSeeCars, just like the largest new used car dealer, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You can list cars there and we can help you sell the car, as well as obviously buy your next car. And we also have vehicle history reports. So if you're looking at a car, you can get the VIN and put it into a vehicle history report and get a very comprehensive report on the maintenance and any accidents the car may have had or anything else that's going on with it.
And you even have a feature where if I'm out car shopping on a Saturday afternoon, I can scan a VIN code and actually do the research that way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can put the VIN in and get that immediate information on the vehicle and see what you should be paying versus what the dealer's asking.
Yeah. And those numbers are not kind of smoke and mirrors numbers. Those are based on actual sales, right?
Yeah. It's really, when you think about it, it makes total sense. And it's, again, the beauty of the combination of data and information like the internet. We can see what various vehicles with certain years, make, model, and mileage are selling for. and we can get a very quick snapshot of what the kind of transaction prices are for these cars. And thus, any given model, we can see where it falls in that spectrum and know that you're paying either too much, too little, or about right for the car. And hopefully you're paying below the good deal price or the average price. That's what we can help you identify.
And do this before you go car shopping. There's nothing worse than going out and buy something and find out you overpaid, right?
Information is power, John. I always
Yep.
say that. So get your information ahead of time. You'll have a lot more power in the negotiation for your car.
Yeah, and if people are interested in where they can find this information, whether it's whether the cars that are for sale, maybe they're thinking about selling their own car or doing some of the research on the editorial side of the site, the letter iSeeCars.com, right?
Yeah, ISEE, like kind of sees candy, we say iSeeCars.com.
Karl, as always, thank you for sharing your knowledge and insight on the automotive market.
Great talking to you, John. Have a great day.